Hello, everyone. I'm Burt Copeland, and I'm the founder of New Life CFO Services, and I wanted to welcome you to our first detailed working session of our podcast series called Succeeding in Seasons of Uncertainty. Yeah, like I said last time, who really doesn't like a good alliteration? Now, what we're diving into this first time is visibility. What can you really see about your company? How far can you see it? And what does it really tell you about your company? So I'm going to ask you a question. When you think about visibility, do you have a budget maybe that gives you a year of visibility? Quite frankly, I'm going to say a year of what you think is visibility, because budgets are not a good indicator about what will happen. They're a great indicator about what we hope will happen, and sometimes what we plan will happen if nothing else takes it off course. It is not an indicator about where your trends are taking you. So it does provide some visibility as long as nothing really changes and you execute. Or are you a company that's like, you know what, I can see about 3 months ahead of me? You know what? Or my order pipeline gives me enough visibility to where I can see 1 month out. Or for some of us, quite frankly, we have the visibility that extends to the end of our arm. We're so focused on the stuff on top of our desk that we're not even looking up to think about the V word, much less try and define it. So as we go through here, we're going to walk through some exceptional great tools that come from ITR Economics and will give you fantastic visibility as to not only where you are, but where you will be in 3, 6, 9, maybe even 12 months. Really more like 6, 9, and 12 months. Forget the 3, right? That's not even as important. So one thing that I'm going to tout at the beginning of this and at the end of it is for you to get this book right here. It's written by the Beaulieu brothers who founded ITR, and that's going to be the basis of a lot of our conversations today. This is an outstanding book. If it takes you more than a day or so to read it, it's because you're not focused on reading it. It's just that good. And I will guarantee you, if you hand this to your analysts, your controllers, or your CFOs, they should be able to put this into action. What we're going to be doing today is helping you to understand how to use this tool and what it's really telling you about your company. It's a unique tool. We're also going to explore some of the other things that go into how do you really assess where your company's going and what you're doing. We're going to start, however, with what most companies do and why that really doesn't work all that well about predicting the future trends about your company. First and foremost, companies will look at their revenue. And I'll tell you flat out, we're going to be looking at your revenue as well, but in a very different way. Most companies will look at their revenue and go, hey, this month isn't too different from last month. This quarter isn't too different from the immediate quarter before. I think we're okay. They may even look at it and says, you know what, we're still kind of growing, or at least we're flat on our growth, and I'm okay. But I'm going to challenge this I'm okay because I think you're looking at the wrong data or too small of a slice of data. And that's a very dangerous thing. What it doesn't tell you by just looking at that is when do you need to take action? Are you approaching the time frame in which it's time to really either take mitigating factors or aggressive proactive factors to reduce your risks position or make you more survivable in the outcomes? Now, other things that people will look at that I think are wildly misleading is they're going to look at their cash balance. I'm okay. I have tons of cash. I'm not too concerned that I'm burning cash right now because I have a big fat pile of cash. And I'm going to tell you that is a bad metric to look at, right? You should never be looking at seasons of uncertainty and going, I have plenty of cash, unless you know what the future is going to demand of that cash. Do not sit in a position of complacency and not take action only because you think you have cash. It's that cash that you may very well need to survive when the season hits, right? So don't just Pollyannic, whistle through the graveyard, burn the cash because I have plenty of cash, because you really haven't assessed how much you're going to need when the stuff hits the fan, right? So that's also a bad deal. Another bad thing is looking at your CRM. Hey, my CRM, it's X millions of dollars. Well, let's face it. Your salespeople are under tremendous pressure to put stuff into your CRM that may not be the probability that they are reflecting. It may not really be 50%. It may not really be 75%. It may not really be whatever percent it is. And unfortunately, in my experience, the more pressure there is on a salesperson during these seasons of uncertainty, the more likely it is that those percentages are less reflective of the real reality. Maybe not of their reality, because I'm pretty sure their reality, they see it as they see it, but of the reality of the customer who's going to be making those decisions. Because I will guarantee you that that dynamic is changing pretty rapidly as well. So the conversations or the indicators that you previously looked at that says, I'm 50% okay, you may not be 50% okay. And the last one that we're going to talk about in depth, it's both a good indicator and it can be an artificial positive indicator, and that's your backlog. For those of y'all that have signed orders and things of that like, you might be going, I'm okay, my backlog's fine. And I will tell you that that can be a huge false indicator. Now, why do you say that, Burt? Well, I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience about some of these indicators. And frankly, I wish I would have gone through my own class 20 years ago, right? So let's roll back the clock 20 years. At that point in time, in 2005, I had recently just bought the operations of a commercial flooring contracting company out from the parent. I was doing awesome. In fact, we'd grown that from $7 million run rate to a $30 million run rate within 3 years. And if you're tracking with me, we went from 2005 to 2008, the beginning of the Great Recession. That's right. And I will tell you that during the Q1 of 2008, I had a big, fat backlog. It was awesome, the amount of work we had. It was awesome until it wasn't. And frankly, I was anesthetized to the fact that, oh, my backlog, I got tons of work, until March hit. In March, all the banks shut down construction on commercial real estate properties and developments. And what happened is that backlog almost became worthless overnight. My revenues in 4 weeks dropped 84%. They went from $2+ million a month in March down to $325,000 in April. May was $375,000. My backlog was worthless because your backlog can always be canceled for projects that are not yet started. Even with that said, I had projects that were started that came to a screeching halt because the banks were not going to fund any more work on that until their work on the collateral was done. So backlog is a good indicator. It's an okay indicator, but it should be used in complementary factor with other things. I would not rely on cash until you've done a detailed planning deal, right? So those are areas where people start to create a false sense of okay, right? But we're really going to tear apart your okayness. Now, unfortunately, at this part, we're going to start diving into some of the things that slides and everything else. And everybody loves to have a good slideshow, right? Well, you're going to have to forgive me because we're going to get into that. And because I have a couple of prepared slides. And if I just talked about it, it would not be the same thing. The other thing people will look at sometimes when they are looking at I'm okay is their inventory. Your inventory doesn't tell you anything about your business. It really doesn't. In fact, it is a big false indicator about positive outcomes. In fact, as we get into this, what you're going to find out is you need to be having a plan to minimize your inventory, not going, oh, I have tons of inventory. I don't have to worry about purchasing it. Inventory is a write-down waiting to happen, right? So we will get into how you manage your inventory as we go through the planning session. But that too sometimes is an indicator where people rely on it when they shouldn't. With that said, let's start jumping into some of the key things that is going to give you visibility. And again, this is all based upon ITR, and I will highly encourage you after we go through this to go get this book and dive in more. In fact, when we're done, if you'll send me a message, and hopefully my marketing folks will put a QR code on here so that you can download a template so that you can do this analysis on your own. Happy to help you out here. So here we go. We talked about previously a lot of the things that are creating instability right now. Obviously, Trump versus Biden, the whole election thing, tariffs and trade, China. And it's more than just tariffs and trade with China. It might be a trade war with China. And there's one thing that I will guarantee you about anything that has to do with a trade war or anything else with China. They are not going to go easily into that good night. If there's going to be a fight to have, they're going to fight. They're not going to back down, not going to back down easily. They have plenty of liquidity to ride this thing out, and they don't have a whole lot of politics to put pressure on them. It's still an autocracy, right? Xi can do whatever he wants for as long as he wants until maybe somebody kills him, which is very unlikely, right? So that's a long-term deal. Stagflation, with the tariffs and everything else, we could have rising inflation without the dynamics of a booming economy. So far, we're anesthetized to it. So far, large companies are eating a lot of the impacts on these tariffs, but it's still out there. Doge. I'm kind of a fan of Doge. I think what they're finding is pretty incredible. I don't know that all of it's true, but hell, if half of it's true, I'm pretty excited as a taxpayer. However, creating areas of uncertainty, the cuts that are going on with Doge are also going to affect this economy. People are losing their jobs. Purchase power is coming out of the marketplace. What do those people buy? How much of an impact are they going to have in the Northeast region, certainly within Washington, D.C.? How much are they going to have in big regional offices within the United States? Who's going to be impacted both positively and negatively? Lots of cuts are coming. Also, lots of hiring are coming. We talk about what's going on in the Department of Transportation. My gosh, air traffic controller is going to be a huge investment. Ebbs and flows. How is this going to impact? Ukraine, God only knows what's going to happen with Ukraine. Russia is going to be in this for a long time. And we go from being enemies of Russia, friends of Russia, Russia's not being really responsive, and maybe we're going to go back to being really aggressive against Russia. But who knows, because this could go on for a while. And for a brief period of time, we all thought that this could be the tipping point of another large war. And speaking of war, we also have what's going on in the Middle East with Israel. You know, hats off to Israel. Nobody expected the outcome where they have tipped the power as they have. But that also makes now Iran in a very precarious situation. What's going on in Gaza is obviously regional life-changing kind of stuff. So who knows? Who knows what that's going to impact and what kind of stability if that war happens to really expand up, or they start using weapons in all those Gulf areas and start sinking some of our ships. Again, I'm not saying all this is going to happen, but there's a lot of risk. As much risk as what we had maybe during 9/11, shortly thereafter, during the Great Recession, and during certain phases of COVID. So with that said, I want to ask you this question. Downturn. Was this you? Was this you during the last recession? Oh my gosh, what has happened? Panic. A lot of people got down to, we are going to slash and burn and everything else. So what happens in this deal is that's really a reflection of a lack of visibility and then a lack of planning. You can't do planning unless you have visibility, right? So you can do planning, but planning without visibility about how these things are impacting you is really just going back to your budget. Your budget's great as long as nothing really big happens that takes it off track. Here's another thing to think about when you get into this kind of planning and visibility and your ability to react. When was the last time that we really had a big recession? And I'm not talking about just the COVID deal, because there was a boatload of printed money and liquidity that came into the marketplace through the benefits of our government. I mean, it was like $6 or $7 trillion that they pumped into our economy. If that had to come in, then yeah, we would have had some real desperate deals. And I'm not talking about the people in restaurants and services that had to shut down. God knows you had a hard time. But the last time that we really went through a recession was the Great Recession. And frankly, that ended 12 to 14 years ago. So when I say that, I want you to look around your leadership table, right? Look at that conference table in that boardroom and ask yourself, how many of these people were in a leadership position in the C-suite responsible for functional areas, directing, guiding, planning, and moving those things forward 14 years ago? In fact, for most of us, it means that your people in your C-suite need to have been 50 to 55 right now to really been in an influential leadership role back then, right? So if your leadership team is 40, 35, the odds are that they've never managed through a recession, ever, right? This is going to be news for them, right? This is not something that they've seen before and have the scars on their back. So look at the age of your people. They're not likely prepared if they're below 40 or 45. They've just never gone through this before. They might have been affected by it, but they didn't have to manage through it, and that's a very different thing. So as we go through this, some of the key things that we're looking at right now, why do people struggle? They don't see it coming, which is our focus point today. Just as a reminder, some of the other things we're going to be looking at is the people lack real risk assessment of their businesses, which is what we talked about revenue and margins and things of that nature. People don't really understand the strength or weakness of their balance sheet and their cost structure. And then lastly, people rationalize or react versus have that plan of action and knowing how to implement that plan of action. Where and what do you take action on? So with that, we're going to go back to visibility. Now, as I talked about, one of the first things people talk about cash, so I'm okay on cash. And I'm going to show you why cash is a really bad leading indicator. So this is a normal growth kind of cash curve, if you will. People are growing and everything else. And what has everybody told you about what happens with cash when you're growing? Please tell me that everybody's told you that growth consumes cash. Like 95% of the time, unless you have a very unique terms on your AP, AR inventory, growth is going to consume cash almost universally. Almost universally. So while you're growing, your revenue looks great. You're all euphoric about your revenue and everything else, but your cash is getting killed, right? You're borrowing you're increasing your lines of credit. Now, what's weird and interesting, and very few people actually think about or embrace, is what happens when the revenue starts to dip. Well, quite frankly, your cash looks really good for an extended period of time. Why is that? That seems so counterintuitive. It's the exact opposite of why cash is being eaten up during your growth periods. Cash is being eaten up by your growth periods because your AR is growing, your inventory is growing, your employment base is growing. Cash is being generated during the initial part of when that curve comes down on the revenue, because now your balance sheet is starting to puke up a whole bunch of cash. You're collecting those big AR balances that were there when the curve was still kind of going up or flattening out. You're liquidating that inventory and you're creating cash out of that. So there's going to be an extended period of time of 60, 90, 120, maybe 150 days where your cash inflows are still going to look good, even though your real trends have changed. And those are your short-term trends. Those are trends that you readily see, and I will guarantee the trends we're getting ready to talk about, you have never seen before in your life unless you know about ITR and you're in Vistage. Now, for those of y'all, but for a lot of y'all even, you've never put this into practice. I know that because I get to visit with a lot of the Vistage chairs. It's not a tool that is widely used, even though it is widely respected. We're going to change that dynamic. In using this tool, what really happens is we're going to remove your rose-colored glasses. We're going to remove that whole feeling about I'm okay. We're going to give you a totally different perspective about your revenues, your trends, and what is likely going to happen in 6 to 9 to 12 months down that. Now again, I love Proverbs. Whether you're an Old Testament person or a New Testament person, they're really good. Listen to the advice and instruction that you may gain wisdom in the future. That's what we're really talking about. And I'm not a prophet, but I'm telling you, you need to have new tools to show you what's going on, or else you're going to be relying on your rose-colored glasses. Now, unfortunately, most business owners are also the number one business promoter of your company. So 90% of the words that come out of your mouth, 90% of the thoughts that are in your head about how great your business is, you talk about the strengths, the positives, and everything else. That itself is a rose-colored glasses that you need to address, right? So here we go. We're going to start addressing your rose-colored glasses. Right here is the overview of the ITR, and there's their website. Please take that down, take a picture, do something. Go look it up right now. If you want to pause this video, go over there and open it up so you can start going through some of this. On the front page of their website, scroll down several screens or whatever, and you're going to see this grid. Now, the great thing is they update this every month so that you can see where major industries are going. And as you read this grid, this A deal, this 0 has to do with are we accelerating in growth or are we in decline? Below the line is decline. Above the line is growth. Okay? But not all growth is good news. And that's what's really important about what this chart says. So they have A, which is this recovery. So we're coming out of a recession here. We're still having negative growth, but it's getting less and less negative growth. Maybe it's 10% negative growth down here. And here it's 5%. And here it's 2% negative growth. And that's an indicator that we're getting ready to come out of this period of recession. Accelerating growth, this B, boy, we all love this part of this graph, man. We are dancing in the streets when this is happening. We're growing faster and faster and faster and faster. All of our magic is coming true in accelerating growth, phase B. Now, the next phase is the trickiest phase of all, and it's where 99.99 whatever percent of y'all are going to jack it all up, right? It's slowing growth. You're actually going from, hey, we're at 10, 20% growth, we're at 15% growth, we're at 10% growth, we're at 5% growth, we're at 2% period over period growth. And we're going to talk about what periods we're referring to there. But the problem is you think all growth is good. And it is good, right? We still like growth, but slowing growth is telling you something radically different than accelerating growth. It's telling you that your momentum, your inertia is starting to be affected by headwinds. So the question is how strong are those headwinds? And that's what we're going to get into, because if the headwinds are real strong, your slowing growth is going to become accelerating decline. You're going to go into phase D, a recession or accelerating decline. I'm only declining by 2%. I'm declining by 5%, 10%. I'm declining by 15% period over period. But I'm telling you, the most important thing here is right here on this slowing growth. That is the period that you really want to be watching for. And as we get into this, another tool that if you send me an email, I will send you all the suggested tactics to take place. The suggested tactics are also in this book. We have developed a list of other recommended tactics for you to consider, depending on whether you're in the early phases of the early part of phase C or in the latter part of phase C. And each phase has different early and late stages to it. So again, that's another tool that you can do. So you can get a template from us to automate this analysis we're ready to go through. You can get a list of suggested tactics from us about what to do. But here's how you read this chart. There's actually two components. When I said slowing growth or accelerating growth, etc., it's comparing your current revenue to a prior period revenue. It's actually making two comparisons. It's looking at your most recent 12 months versus 12 months, the same 12 months a year ago. And it's looking at the most recent 3 months versus the same 3 months a year ago. So as we take a look at it, we have 12 over 12, which is this blue line, the change in revenue, most recent 12 months, like we just finished April, so April through May of last year versus April through May of 24 back through 23. And it's looking at rate of change, right? So it's an interesting calculation that says Revenue at this period versus last period, it shows that I'm growing by X percent or Y percent, or it shows that I'm declining by X percent or Y percent. Again, this dark line is the zero growth line. And so what this shows us, and then we have the same thing, the orange line is 3 months, 3 over 12. Most recent 3 months relative to the same 3 months a year ago. And the reason you want both those is this 3 over 12 is much more sensitive to change, right? It tells you that, whoa, winds have started to change here. This may be a signal that things are really going to change for us. So as we look at this one, and I have explanations about what's going on here as far as their deals. Right over here, the 3 over 12 went below the 12 over 12, and about right here, this company entered slowing growth, right? They're in phase C, really phase C. And most people ignore taking action in phase C because they see growth is still growth. Not all growth is created equally. Now, as they get in here, this the 3 over 12, the most sensitive of these two metrics, just went into a decline mode, right? So your most recent quarter versus the same quarter a year ago just showed you that you're now into a decline mode. Year over year still says you're growing. So you have this false positive up here on 12 over 12, and your most recent stat says, I have a problem. I'm getting ready to go into accelerating decline or decline. Now what's interesting is between this line, when it goes into the 3 over 12 goes into decline, we really have it's mixed right here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months before the 12 over 12 does the same thing. That's 6 months of preparation that you could be taking to mitigate the impact, to accumulate resources, to pay down debt so that you are really strong when your total company goes into decline, right? It's the most important thing when this 3 over 12 goes down, between the slowing growth and when this 3 over 12 goes down. Now, if you look at both periods, you want a long visibility session. So over here, we got our first indicator that we have a problem. We're starting slowing growth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months before the total company goes into decline. 12 months of heads up, of real visibility about how the economy is affecting your sales channel. And I will guarantee you, your budget doesn't show that. It just doesn't. It's assuming that everything's okay, and it's not. So think about that. We have 6 months, 4 to 6 months of holy smokes, we're almost there. And we have 12 months of a good leading indicator of things that we need to be taking. Now, think about that when you went through the Great Recession last time. Think about that, and COVID's a different deal because that shock and awe was everything. So we'll just stay with the Great Recession. What if, instead of me stubbing my toe in April of 2008 when my revenues dropped 85%, what if I could actually see that in April of 2007 that I need to start accumulating resources and being very conservative? And I'll guarantee you, my foot was on the gas. Go, baby, go. I was spending money for growth-oriented stuff all over the place. But if I'd actually had 12 months like this company did to conserve resources, I will guarantee you that I would have been a hell of a lot healthier. I would have reduced and cut fewer people, and I'd have I'd have a hell of a lot less gray hair there, brother. That's for sure. So think about that. What would you have done differently if you really had a crystal ball that gave you 6 to 12 months of a heads up if things were going to change? Now down here, this company looks like it's having some positive impacts a little bit, but they don't last long enough, and it goes back into at least a flattening level decline. They're no longer declining faster and faster, so they're flattening out. So we're only declining by 10%, and that's not really great news, but it's no longer bad news. It means that your headwinds are equal, and you might be towards the bottom of this trough getting ready to go into recovery mode. So that's very important. So here's some real company examples. This one's on revenue, And when you do this, you want to do it on revenue or volume. I'm not a fan of doing this on gross margin. I'm certainly not a fan of doing this on EBITDA because there's too many accounting nuances that can flow in and out. There's too many one-time changes that go through your P&L that distorts this deal. So you want to look at things that really indicate volume of activity. It could be your revenue. In this case, revenue is kind of skewed because this company had a big price increase. And so we're going to look at revenue versus volume and what it tells us. I will encourage you, if you have lines of revenue that are radically different from one to the other, you might want to do this on the different lines. That's also going to be really important in the future if one of these lines shows that it's really jacked up and the other ones are pretty healthy. Now you have a great indicator about really where to make the changes fast on that one line of revenue that's jacked up. So you can see here that this company doing well. It's showing heavy growth here, but boy, does that 3/3 cuts below the 12 sharply, and then soon after that starts pulling us down. It goes into declining really here, kind of bounces around, but that's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 months that they had an indicator. And then as soon as that changes, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months until now they're down to really slow growth. It kind of flattens back out and then again goes back down here. But when these lines cross, that's when you can start counting the months going, I have an early heads up. I have X number of months to take action to make sure that I either change my markets, change what's creating this headwind, or react to it and start conserving resources or building my war chest. Now let's take a look about when we look at volume on this thing. Volume shows that it's actually worse because again, the other one was muted because of what was going on between volume and revenue and the price increase. In fact, let's just look real quick down here and you can see the differences on the 3/12. Here's where the price increase came in. You can see that these lines are tightly correlated throughout that. As soon as the price increase in, look at what happens with the revenue line. The revenue line, while it's not great news, it's not nearly as negative news as this direct materials or their volume because there's no pricing impact on the volume. So this is why it might be really good to do the same exercise on volume as it is on your revenue, certainly on your separate revenues. If we look a little bit more closely is what's going on the volume side, you can see right here that they had a warning that came in right here when the 3/12 went right back down. And then they had 6 to 7 months before the 12/12 or yearly trend really took place. And then right here, again, it touched base as far as zero growth. And it was another 6 months before the year-over-year went into decline. So again, I asked, do you really have good metrics that show you what's going to happen with your business 6 to 12 months out? Most people are, if you're honest with yourself, you're going to say no. And I will tell you that this is the most valuable thing that you could be looking at to understand the direction of your businesses and how much it's affecting you. Now, what's really interesting is also think about how much it's affecting your customers, right? Where do your customers likely have this? So when you start doing this on your different lines of businesses, that's when you need to ask yourself, how are these lines of businesses being impacted by what's going on with my customers? And how are my customers being impacted by this? We're going to dive a lot more into that question when we get into the qualitative nature of your revenues, because again, not all revenues are created equal. As we close this out, here's some other things that people can look at. And again, backlog. It's not a universal good thing, but I do look at number of months of revenue in my backlog. And I get it that my backlog could be shut down. We did that. We talked through that earlier. It could be turned off like a spigot on the side of your house. But here's how I use my number of months of revenue and backlog. Like when I had my construction company, I always wanted to have 4 to 5 months of revenue in my backlog because my sales cycle was 3 to 4 months. And if I had 4 to 5 months of revenue in my backlog relative to where I was projecting out, it meant that I was okay. I could replace my backlog pretty readily along the lines that it took me on my sales cycle. But if my revenue, my backlog got to be 3 months of revenue, and certainly 2 months of revenue, boy, I better start booking stuff hand over fist. But even slight changes, if it's constantly 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, and it becomes 4, whoa, 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 that's a flag, right? That's a flag. And then you monitor closely, like, oh, it just went to 3.75. You need to be taking action, right? Because you don't have that much time to get things done and done well. Hopefully the other things will tell you what's a better indicator. So if you wanted to do volume-based instead of revenue-based deals, one of the things you might actually look at is your bookings per month. Not your revenues per month, not your volume per month, but your bookings per month. What's going into your backlog? Number of new deals and value of new deals signed, and then do the 12 over 12 and 3 over 12 on that. So those are the components going into your backlog. And while your backlog could still be shut off, this is a great indicator about the speed in which your deal flow is coming to you. And let's say you do have 4 months of revenue in your backlog, and your ITR on your revenue says that you have 6 months before the stuff hits the fan. You now have 10 months of great data to take action. Do you have 10 months right now? I don't think you do. Because most companies that I deal with don't. And I've dealt with hundreds of companies, so I have a pretty good deal. You might look at the value of the stuff in your CRM that's 50% or more relative to your future revenue. There's going to be some correlations there. Unfortunately, as your salespeople get into stress, they tend to start fudging some of those percentages, but it's still a decent metrics. And then if you could just look at the customers in your industry, those things alone are going to give you some really good insight. So that's what we really talked about today. We wanted to focus on ITR, and this was a long session, but it's a very important session. Again, contact us for the template in which you can load your own data, and you're going to need at least 48 months, if not 7 years of data to really see these trends and the timelines. Number 2, contact us, and we will send you the recommended course of actions that you should take depending on what phases you're in. And lastly, go get this book. Have your CFO read it. Have your controller read it. I mean, look, it's not that thick. You're going to get through this thing really quickly. Don't let the fact that you need to read a book prevent you from being educated. Anyways, that's all I have today. I know that it's been a long session, and I get really excited about this stuff, and that makes me very unique because nobody else does. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll see us again for our next session. Y'all take care, and as we work together, we're going to get through and get to succeeding in seasons of uncertainty. Take care.